Welcome to Inaudible. My name is Jeremy Weiland, and I'm joined by today's co host, Nithin Ready. On this podcast, we discuss the weird, beautiful channeled messages found in the archives of organizations like LL Research, Circle R, and others. The archives contain transcripts of messages from allegedly discarnate sources who articulate a philosophy of spiritual evolution. If you would like an audio version of the transcripts, please subscribe to Ryan Masterson's podcast, Living Love and Light, available on all platforms. Nithin and I will try to provide analysis and commentary on the philosophy described in these messages, identifying the common themes, and grappling with the application of this information to our human lives. Thanks for joining us on this journey. And Nithin, long time. How's it going, man?
It's not bad, not bad. Ebb and flow of life. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty great. Been enjoying the new forum that we set up for the working group and others to talk about the law of one and all sorts of other things. And we're already digging into stuff. It's really cool to see people coming up with their own projects and their own tacks that they want to take on this philosophy. Some of us are working on putting together study groups. Others, there's even like a project where people are talking about using AI to basically basically using AI and machine learning to ingest all of the raw contact material and then see if you can get a AI chatbot to act like raw, which is really really bizarre, but kind of an interesting thing.
We got to be careful. They're already saying that some AI chatbots are sentient. So, I'm sure Raw saw this probability vortices, and we'll have an interesting outcome if we actually follow through. If someone follows through with that project.
Yeah. Just as long as they don't lock the doors to the room and say no, you can't leave. Yeah. Things are going well. I mean, I'm probably going to go on a hike after this with my wife and my dogs, and just been enjoying life, man. It's summer.
Amen to that.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and jump right into our topic for the day. The Kuo session that we're going to look at is from October 11th, 2008. And the way that I'm thinking about the overall theme here is that it's about digest and catalyst. As Nithin pointed out before we started recording, it's like, haven't we talked about Catalyst quite a bit on this podcast? And that's true. We have. More than one occasion, Catalyst has been the subject. But it's also kind of the whole reason that we're here. So it kind of makes sense. It's like why do you keep talking about the law of one, man? Like, haven't we talked about that on the podcast? So it's just like, yeah, I know it's repetitive. Kuo is repetitive. The Confederation's repetitive. But I hope that we can find some nuances about dealing with Catalyst, how to ground it and work with it that will be helpful to the listener. And I thought that this one had some juicy bits that frame things in a way I hadn't heard of it before. Um, any
It's
thought?
such an important topic.
Yeah,
It's so important.
exactly. We can't really talk about it enough. And there's always the unsubscribe button. So, all right. Well, why don't we jump right in? So here's the question that was read at the beginning. In the body complex, we have a process whereby we ingest a variety of foodstuffs for the survival and growth of our body. Our body, however, does not use the majority of the food we give it. Instead, it separates the nutrients and other helpful materials from the food, absorbs those materials, and eliminates the rest. In the mind complex, we have a process whereby we are constantly bombarded with catalyst from within and without. Analogous to the body, our mind must take only the nutritious portions of our catalyst in order to furnish ourselves with the distilled experience for the purpose of spiritual evolution. Can you discuss how our minds distill our experience with special focus on how we eliminate that which is not helpful for our growth? I hope that the listener can hear in that some real specific questions about dealing with catalysts. It's not just about catalysts as an overall phenomenon. This is about treating it almost as we treat our diet. And there are aspects to catalyst. It sounds like Jim, who read this question, it sounds like they're implying that. Oh, I don't think it was Jim, but it doesn't matter who read it. They're implying that what we experience as catalyst is not pure catalyst. Some of it is just waste product, right? Some of it is just the fiber in the diet, and others of it are the vitamins and nutrients that we're looking for. Was that kind of the sense of how you interpreted the question, Nithin?
Yeah, I think that there's a distilling process that is there to be utilized. Obviously, you know, food, the process is relatively automatic if you have a relatively healthy body. But for catalyst, I think it's a little bit more intentional. But there is definitely a process where you take the nutrients and realize some stuff is not necessarily directly related to what's going on.
Yeah, yeah, and that distillation, I often hear it talked about as grounding in the deep mind. Right, we're trying to take the lessons from the proximate events that convey the lessons. They're not going to like spell it out all the time clearly for us what the lesson is. And so I find that like perhaps what they're talking about in the distillation is the separation of the philosophical spiritual content from the thing that conveys the content to us, the the fight that we have, or the encounter that disturbs us, or whatever the catalyst is.
Absolutely, I think for me when I was thinking about the nutrients versus the fiber, two types of categories of this example as it applies to catalysts popped up. I think the main example, the reason this analogy is used is that there's that dichotomy between the surface level trigger, what initially we think is the issue, and it's usually some external thing, versus what's truly going on inside of us that triggered the response. And it's often, I mean, even for me, right? For whatever reason, maybe because we're still programmed at a level, we often think, oh, the problem is this, and you're pointing to something outside of yourself. And then when you actually take a time to reflect, to digest it, which we'll talk about, you realize no, it was some belief, perspective, expectation, fear, insecurity within me. But there is a second category that I think is less common of where you have fiber and you have nutrients, and for me that some things are there are certain aspects to Catalyst that is a bit random, and also, I put this in my notes here, that there's also a certain aspect of Catalyst where, depending on your choices, you can engage and become a part of someone else's catalyst, like taking it upon yourself. And you actually see this more overtly and specifically referred to in a lot of like Indian spiritual systems, where the guru is said to take the karma
Mm.
of their followers. You can so, and I've noticed you can actually, and I think this happens perhaps also in long term relationships, serious relationships, where you can totally notice that you're actually taking on your significant other's catalyst, but it's not really your own direct catalyst. And I'm not saying that there can't be learning through that, but it's a different sort of, I think, learning than when it's your own catalyst.
Yeah, it tends to imply in my mind that we talk about a lesson, but that lesson only makes sense with respect to a given subject. And with another subject, another entity, that lesson might mean something different. It might seat itself in the consciousness or in the experience or in the spiritual evolutionary path in a different way. And that's okay. That's perfectly okay. In fact, when you were talking about taking on someone else's catalyst, I mean, one of the reasons one might find that useful is to set an example. Another reason would be to share whatever suffering they're going through in order to give them a sense that they're not alone. There's many different reasons you would do it, and it means that the catalyst would be a slightly different catalyst for the person taking it on than the person directly experiencing it, right?
Absolutely, it would change its nature just by virtue of that it's not as direct.
Yeah. And like in order for it to be properly assumed by the second person, it would have to be very willing. It has to be very voluntary, right? Like, because otherwise, if it feels like it's happening to you and you're not assuming it, well, that's just normal catalyst, man, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're not doing it in a willing fashion, it's gonna appear as a different sort of catalyst as opposed to when you're doing it in a willing fashion.
Yeah. Like I was just talking with a friend who's going through a real tough experience in his life yesterday, and we were, on our second pitcher of beer, and he's kind of not really able. He wants to get past all the stuff that's going on, but he just can't. And like I don't have the experience that he does. I didn't see any ability for me to take on the catalyst that he's dealing with. But I think by putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, that's one way that those of Ra have said that it's possible to determine uh, what service would be useful, right? Like what we think is useful for somebody else from where we're standing, not so important. We have to stand in their shoes, try to put ourselves in their mindset, and then find out. And like in that case, like instead of taking on the catalyst like as your own problem, you can just simply open yourself up to the catalyst that they're dealing with and try to feel it as fully as you can without wanting to run away. Like sometimes when someone has such a awful things happen in their life, like the thing that I'm thinking is, well, thank God I'm not like that, and I don't even want to feel close to like that. I just want to get away from it. And so I think being a friend means recognizing that you can't directly help somebody with the things that they're going through. You can't work their catalyst out for them. You can only show them a different point of view so many times, right? But you can be there with them. You can be willing to feel along with them. And that's more helpful, I think, than a lot of things we try to do.
Absolutely, and I love how you went to the idealized version of sharing catalysts immediately, whereas I always think of like the non ideal versions, right? And I mentioned this in past podcasts. Let's say the drug addict who doesn't want to go deeper and distill the fiber from the nutrients, and they're projecting their issues onto other things. Like if I'm drinking, it's because of this, this, and this, and you can help me out with these external things.
Right.
And you're like, and they're asking you or really pressuring you to do something, and you're like, well, they're going through a lot of pain, even though this is not the real issue. A part of you wants to be compassionate and help out, and that's fine. But then a part of you might just feel like, you're being pressured so much,
Yeah.
even though you don't really want to be compassionate in the way that they're asking, you go ahead and kind of maybe enable them to avoid their own lessons. I see this a lot in that people uh, who don't want to accept responsibility for their own catalyst will often project whatever trouble that they're going through onto other people as you're causing the problem, and other people, and they'll ask certain things of other people. I see this in the workplace a lot, right? The boss doesn't want to accept whatever is going on, and they project it, and it's because the employees are doing something, and they make bigger asks of the employee, right? And so then the employee's like, I don't necessarily agree, but I'm going to do it, right?
Yeah.
And it creates this chain of catalysts where every single step of the catalyst is different than the one before. So and I actually put this in my notes in that sometimes in that sort of aspect, it's setting boundaries can be very, very important.
Yeah, I agree. So let's go ahead and jump into the part where Kuo starts. They do their whole disclaimer and greeting and telling us how much they love us, and that's great. But let's move past that and go directly into the message. So this is Kuo. Comparing the acquisition of incoming experience to the acquisition of foodstuffs is very apt, my brother. There is indeed food that is for the physical body, and there is food that is nutriment for the body that is your energetic body. And indeed, just as a person who is thoughtful and wishes to maximize his nutrition will make choices that he has come to feel are wise in what he does and does not eat and drink, just so is there a substantial amount that an entity can do as he meets the waves of experience that flood his senses and his emotions day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. Firstly, one may consider the moment of realization of some new catalyst. Suddenly, you are asked to take a big bite of something new, a new thought, an exchange between yourself and another, or a conversation with yourself that has led you in a new direction. Whatever it is, suddenly you are chewing over a new idea, a new emotion, a new impulse, or a new thought. The phrase chewing over is one we used on purpose because there is a way to consider that which is incoming. Just as you chew your food, until the saliva in your mouth has entered into the breaking down of the foodstuff, thus promoting digestion. So, too, as you receive something that triggers your emotions and you find yourself tempted towards an impulsive reaction, it is a skillful thing, spiritually speaking, to refrain from immediate and impulsive response, but rather chew the trigger over in your mind. All right, let's interject there. Any thoughts from you, Nithin?
I mean, it's very apt. But one thing that comes to mind is how useful it is to observe yourself if you can when you're experiencing the trigger. That being said, and I'm sure we'll talk about this. Um, in some cases, whatever your initial response, your initial impulsive response is, um, oftentimes whether you engage in that response or not is not as directly relevant to actually learning as to whether you learn the lesson. The key aspect is, do you revisit that at some later point, even after the impulsive response, and take personal emotional responsibility? I use that phrase a lot, where you're like, it ultimately was not the external trigger that caused my emotions; it was something within me. Um, but observing yourself, so there's multiple layers of observing yourself, at least in the situations I often find myself in. One, you could be in a work situation, as you know, I'm a lawyer, where you're in court. It's expected you respond. You can't just like, oh, let me just be quiet and not say
Yeah.
anything, even though they really upset me for like, a minute. You got to respond. You have to. I mean, you could get into whether you have to respond, but I guess I'm not at that stage where I want to put my job in jeopardy, so
Yeah.
I respond, right? But then the second aspect is, putting aside work situations, you can be in a social situation where if you don't respond, it'll be interpreted as some sort of like admission, right? They actually have this concept in the law of adoptive admission. If you don't respond to something that's crazy and outrageous and outlandish, you're basically agreeing, your silence is agreeing it's true. And that actually can be used as an admission against you in court under certain circumstances. So socially, that I find that's often true. If you don't respond, sometimes people take it to mean that it's true. And then third, at least with some people, they'll actually egg you on if you don't respond, saying, "Oh, cat got your tongue," if you're not really like vitriolic exchange. So I guess what I've said, what I'm trying to say is, I've definitely paused. I found great value in pausing and when I can, and actually just observing my own reactions. But I have to say that I've been trying to put that specific thing into practice for a few years now, and it's hit or miss because of those aforementioned situations where I feel like I need to respond. But
Absolutely.
it is very useful.
Well, the thing, one of the things that sticks out in my mind over and over about this session is their use of the word skillful. They often talk about skills. This is something that Buddhists often talk about too. Like when when skill is brought into play, it's less about rules that you're supposed to follow or the the concrete dynamics of the situation you're in. And it's more about like something that you learn that you can apply, almost like a heuristic or some kind of technique, right? Remember, we don't begin and end in technique, but in the creator, as Ross says, right? But it doesn't mean that there aren't techniques that you can use to kind of help yourself work through these things as you would use, I don't know, like crutches to help yourself heal, but still stay mobile from a leg or foot injury. The idea that you don't, I mean, we need to both recognize, I think, that it is rather novel to many people that you wouldn't immediately respond or you wouldn't immediately react to that squeezing that what catalyst does to you that make that impacts your emotional body, right? You like those of Kuo say, you take in this new thought, this new experience, and you have a reaction. That is part of what it means to be an entity, to have that reaction. And the skill comes from getting so used to experiencing new things that it doesn't phase you. This is something we talked about last episode, where I think Kuo said something, or Hatan said something like, when your heart's open, you're ready for anything, which is great because anything often happens to the creation, right? Like,
Right.
it doesn't, it is a way that you work with your own equipment, your own emotional, spiritual, physical, mental equipment. And it's just, and it means that it's not wrong to have the emotional reaction that you immediately have. It's simply a skillful way of dealing with it. Just like it's not wrong to be startled when someone scares you. It's just about a skillful way of dealing with that in a social situation so that you don't create a worse situation than already exists. Maybe that's a bad analogy.
No, so I think you bring up some great points. And let me just preface my comment with I think there's two areas that you bring up that are really, really important to go into. One, the use of the word skillful. But the other area you bring up is the idea that it's a fairly novel concept to kind of not react or you said basically it's a fairly novel concept to kind of observe your emotional reaction in the moment, right? So let me start with that. When I kind of started working in this area of observing catalysts in the moment, I felt like there was really, to me, three ways of handling catalysts in the moment, and I think two of them are more commonly used in society and not as effective as what we're talking about, just observing. And when we say observing, we'll talk. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't say anything, but it's kind of your relationship to what's going on, right? You can say some stuff, but you're not going to be as engaged, and feel personally attacked, right? It's a different way of interacting. But you can just not. I just want people to understand that observation is more like a mindset. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't say shit, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, but specifically, when we're talking about observing what's going on, I feel like there's two other ways to handle this, or two other ways that are traditionally used to handle these situations. One is what you said, just most people react without necessarily observing, without necessarily, if you haven't been exposed to, I guess, engaging with things that bother you at a deeper level, you probably just react, right, in the moment and just handle the situation, whatever the external trigger was. We've talked about observing and that, in observing your own emotions while you're doing what you're doing while the situation's happening. But I think there's an intermediate version that is not useful that people often use when they start the spiritual path, and I think even when they do some self-improvement. And that is an over focus on suppressing the reaction.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I need to not react. That's how I master the situation. Just not react. But they'll let themselves get super angry and they won't actually address the inner emotional turmoil. And actually, when that happens, I think you actually make for much worse situations in the long run. You hurt yourself emotionally. You keep that anger bottled up. It's very unhealthy. And when that trigger arises again, you might be able to suppress your reaction. But if you haven't addressed the anger keeps building. And eventually, and I see this all the time in so many situations, right? People with poor impulse control come into criminal court, where that trigger, it's some small trigger, but it was a trigger that they've been exposed to repeatedly, and they kept suppressing their reaction and not dealing with the emotions, the beliefs behind it. And it just finally blows up, and they go crazy over something relatively small because they haven't dealt with it in the appropriate fashion. They dealt with it through suppression. So I would summarize it in that when I read this, it's just one way is just reacting normally and not thinking or going deep into what happened. A second way is an over focus on suppressing the reaction, while still not going deep into what happened. And the third is kind of going deep into what happened, and really just being in that observing mindset.
Totally agree. I was simply pointing out that I don't think it's occurred to a lot of people to have that observer mindset in the first place. The most natural way to experience emotions and to react to them is immediately, viscerally, without a lot of self-consciousness. And let's all be clear. We all have reacted to things without
Absolutely.
self-consciousness, and we've all learned from that. So it's not that it's bad to do that. That's why I think the word skillful is so useful, because it talks about this is about a choice that you make on how to have the same experience, but just approach it in a different way. That's all. You are still like I appreciate what you say that like sometimes having the reaction in the moment is the right thing to do. Sometimes suppressing it leads to long-term problems. To me, it occurred that part of the skill in addressing things in the moment is to take it into the heart when you're out of the moment. If you don't do that, then you are just suppressing things. You have to
Absolutely.
revisit this stuff in order for it to be processed and actually digested.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's part of the skill. It's not just about coming off the best that you can in the moment. It's about giving yourself an opportunity to face the thing that maybe you couldn't completely react to in the moment. You
Yeah.
do need to react to it.
Yeah, maybe if the analogy is basically the initial onslaught of the of the catalyst, so to speak, is putting the food in your mouth. Then the question is, are you going to chew it or are you just going to swallow it? And
Right.
like, and it's important to. I mean, Raw talks about this. It's something that I've used for the past 5-10 years. Is on a daily level. At the end of the day, it's separate but very close to when I meditate. I just contemplate, you know, um, what triggered me today, and did what were the underlying beliefs? Did I respond with love? Is there more work to be done where I can naturally figure out what's blocking the flow of love? Or what expectations, fears, and securities do I have, and just work upon myself. And it's revisiting those triggers that you had during the day that allows for that distillation, that chewing process.
Yeah, and this is why I was so interested in talking about this particular session. In the moment is when all of the learning and experience that you've brought to bear to date come into play. It is in that squeeze of the moment when you get the first hint of the emotional content of of the situation you're in. That is such a crucial and it's a crucial thing, and it's something I've actually asked Kwa about before. Like, it happens so quickly. It happens so quickly sometimes that you react. And this concept of being triggered is the perfect way to express that. And I feel like what we're learning is how to deal with our triggers in a way where we can expand the amount of time we have to consider them. That's what I think the real skill is like we don't always have that time in the moment, so we need to have another approach that gives us the time. It does seem like time is an important thing. We need to have the opportunity to seat this stuff, and we can't always choose wisely in the moment. So like this idea of like a skill of dealing with it, I think really puts in focus what it is that we're talking about in this session.
Absolutely.
Let's go ahead and continue because Kuo continues to talk about this topic. Perhaps the trigger is an old friend, one you recognize as having been able to offer you catalyst in the past. A moment to contemplate the catalyst, and you will begin to work with that catalyst without your having to do anything other than honor and respect the emotional process that has been offered to you. You may consider whether you wish to move with the response that impulsively came to you. Perhaps you do, but you may not. You may find it to be less than your deepest and truest response. So then you have the opportunity to move past whatever pain or suffering was in the trigger that moved you from your previous setting of peace and contentment. It is not that you are looking for better behavior from yourself. The attempt to, quote, behave often creates more problems for the seeker than the willingness to speak honestly, or as this instrument would say, speak truth to power. If heads roll and feelings are hurt because it was ethically necessary for you to tell the truth, then so be it. However, there are many times when the initial surface response that has been triggered is not your deeper truth, but rather an artifact left over from your childhood or from earlier in your life when you did not feel supported, cherished, or valued. It takes a surprisingly small amount of time to recognize such triggers and to turn to that inner child or that younger version of yourself that was harmed and has suffered and express to it with caresses and kisses and rocking in your arms that you love and honor and respect that pain. And you are there to comfort and give the balm of Gilead to that suffering. I think that just expands on what we were saying, but also goes into one or two new areas. Um, I think it's important to recognize that the Confederation does see a place for the spontaneous reaction. Those of Ra mentioned that is in the unstudied spontaneous response to catalysts that we sort of recognize it most clearly, right? We recognize what the lesson is most clearly. And here they're saying that sometimes that is appropriate. Maybe not court, but maybe in other situations. I know that like there have been, especially since I started like seriously walking the spiritual path, I have noticed more spontaneous expressions of anger than I did before. And it's really weird. You would think that it would be the opposite. I think things are being uncovered as I'm addressing issues, new issues come up, right? Like it becomes safe for the self to express to the self the pain that it has. And so you start to see yourself working through this stuff. The issue is not, in my opinion, what the right thing to do is in the situation, but the thing is, who is the self whose best truth is being expressed at that moment? Like, if you react in a way that it doesn't express your highest truth, that is just as instructive as uh, not reacting and taking it into meditation or reflection or something, and then sort of mulling it over and wondering who the self is that wants to respond.
Agree. And your comment about you've experienced, or I don't know how exactly you phrase it, but you've in general you've experienced more anger, at least consciously, once you've started walking the spiritual path. So I find that very similar to my own experience. In my upbringing, though, you know, I was taught, and this I think is very normal, that you shouldn't. A good person doesn't experience a lot of anger, right?
Yeah.
But so it wasn't, which is kind of like a distortion of what I think how a healthy person should be, right? Or how a person who's processing catalyst should be. It's not that you shouldn't experience anger. I would word it that whatever anger you experience, you act and process it in a constructive fashion so that you resolve the underlying issue, right? So it's not that the anger itself is the evil and you just suppress it and avoid it. It's more like it's a tool, it's a pointer to where you can improve yourself spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. But because like I think a lot of families, you just were you're not supposed to be angry. My way of dealing with anger, and I didn't even realize this, was just to automatically suppress it because it was unacceptable, right?
Yeah.
So unlearning those mechanisms so that I could organically allow myself to experience anger and then organically process that catalyst and learn from it became very important in my spiritual path. A lot of red, orange ray issues, even yellow ray, were very, very interrelated to that. And in a certain sense, I noticed that I became more comfortable and familiar with the emotion of anger, where in the past I would just completely suppress it, and it would be horrible because it would, as I said before, when you suppress something completely, it'll often come out when the trigger arises again and again and again in a huge outburst, right? And it's not healthy or useful. And those would be the situations where you overreact, and it's not necessarily the best way to handle that impulsive moment.
Yeah, the idea of skill, I think that really appeals to me is the idea that how do I put this? Like even lashing out in the most non-self-aware way teaches, right? All of these responses, reactions, whether they are skillful or not, teach. So when you introduce skill into the situation, you're bringing experience and memories of past experiences, and you're saying, I'm giving myself a choice where before I didn't give myself a choice.
Right.
The whole concept of a trigger is that you don't have a choice. The stimulus happens and the response is immediate. That is the triggering. So as you develop the ability to have a choice of how you respond, you're slowly decoupling these things that may be very, like Kuo says, very deeply buried experiences of pain. We don't want to feel pain, and it's completely rational that we don't want to feel pain, but it is an important part of the human experience, and we do need to make time for it and respect it. And that is where the skill comes in. Ways to respect both your own third density surface needs to maintain relationships, to maintain some sort of decorum, and to not make things worse according to how you understand things, but also being able to actually face this pain, face this distortion. It's nice when you can do it on your own terms. Sometimes you don't feel that you can, but the skill comes from recognizing how you can meet both needs. Your need to be an authentic human being that has anger and negative emotions, and your ability to better participate in your spiritual evolution by making use of these experiences, by healing the wounds, balancing the distortions.
Absolutely, and I think it's very, very important to give space to one's experience to have these sorts of catalysts, to have these sorts of triggers, and then by doing so, you definitely add a little bit more space between the automatic impulsive reaction and the actual trigger. I would, when I was in management before, I often tell my attorneys that I was training, look, every attorney, no matter how good they are, if they handle any amount of clients, you're going to have a client who is unjustly unhappy with your excellent performance and is going to wrongfully accuse you of doing things that are not true.
Yeah.
Now, as you get better at being an attorney, that's going to happen less and less often. But even the most experienced attorney, that's going to happen to them maybe once every few years, maybe for a new attorney, a few times a year. But the bottom line is, it's always a part of your experience as an attorney that you're going to be unjustly accused of something. And so when it happens, definitely ask yourself, how can you learn from it? But don't be like, this should not be happening. Because the fact is this stuff happens. So give it space in your reality, because it's going to happen whether you give it space or not. And if you don't give it space, you're just going to react poorly and not really understand the true dynamics of the situation.
Yeah, when someone criticizes how you did your job, that bugs us if for no other reason, because if we're honest with ourselves, and I think a lot of what we're talking about here is honesty, right? What is the honest response? What is the honest way to deal with the pain, right? So when someone criticizes your job because they don't think you did it well, a lot of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we always think we could do better, right? Like there's
Right.
always a reason to think that you, in some small way, let somebody down. But there's also ways in which they let us down too. Like that honesty with yourself so that somebody else doesn't trigger a crisis where then you have to be, intensely honest with yourself. And you just set a pattern of being honest with yourself. And you're coming up with skills, heuristics, techniques for revisiting this pain, revisiting this this grief or this sorrow or these buried memories that still hurt you. You're doing right by it, and you're doing right by the human situation that you're in. As you learn to decouple, I think you're decoupling the defensive reaction you have to protect yourself from the pain that you felt in the past. You're decoupling that reaction from the just being able to look at the situation as it is.
Absolutely. And at least in that example where someone's criticizing, maybe wrongfully criticizing your performance, I often talk about fears, insecurities, and expectations. Maybe you have the expectation that if you let's say objectively you did your job correctly in this case, you still, most of us have this expectation that if I did my job correctly, I should not be criticized unjustly. Right. But the fact is that welcome to Earth. It happens. All right. You might be able to decrease the frequency, but it happens. So it's, once again, I often call it softening, and this is part of the ego, I think, softening those expectations into just mere preferences. I prefer not to be criticized if I've done my job correctly, but hey, I prefer strawberry. If I get chocolate, I'm not gonna throw a hissy fit, right? But also it's not just, all these catalysts have many different layers, effect, and if you look at the archetypes, if you look at transformation of the mind, they actually have all the different energy rays, energy centers, but they affect so many different energy centers, and we're I'd like to just briefly, not to digress, but just in case we have some people who are maybe not haven't listened to a lot of the podcasts, there are so many tools for catalysts, and we've skipped from one to another, but I just want to just briefly list the ones that I've been using off the top of my head.
Heck yeah.
So let me just jump off in this example. For example, though, the reason this unjustly being accused might bother you isn't just the expectation aspect. It's also that maybe you also have a little bit of insecurity that you're not good enough. Yep. And maybe objectively speaking, you did great in this case. But because you have that inner kernel of maybe I'm not a good enough attorney in general, or in some few cases, I'm insufficient, and that makes me not worthy of love. That situation, external situation, will often trigger that inner lack of self-love. So anyway, here's just some things in no particular order. If there's an order, it's just because maybe what I would how I process a given catalyst recently. But there's no particular order to these things, and they appear in the quo material, raw material. So offering up the uncomfortable, and a lot of these things I'm listing are not necessarily, they're very difficult to do in the moment. You got to revisit this, right? So okay, offering up the uncomfortable emotion to the creator, being a vessel for the one infinite creator's experience, and letting things flow, and letting yourself feel bad. Um, Visualizing the opposite situations or feelings, the opposite emotion, accepting via understanding the situation as a part of life on Earth, accepting via faith. And faith, I think, is very difficult to define, but for me, I would say it's a general confidence that things will make sense and that you will generically be provided for. Even if A, B, and C is something you want, that might not happen. You'll still be taken care of by the creator in the creator's own way. And for me, I think it's faith for me often is based on actual personal subjective experience. I think it's difficult to build true faith purely on the basis of something you read. It's something, it's almost like a memory of what you observed, your relationship with the creator. Anyway, um focusing on the present moment energetically, that's so observing the reaction, the emotions, but also observing your energy body, the moment, I think can be very powerful. Setting boundaries, because sometimes other people will often try to offload, or not offload, but when other people are not accepting their own catalyst, they will often blame external things, and they might blame you. And you can, and they might have certain asks of you, and it's okay to do what they want, um, but just remember, you might be doing it out of a true service to others, or you might be doing out of a distorted sense of I'm obliged to do it, or maybe you feel pressured, right, to control. They're controlling you to a certain level. I think talking about catalysts with friends definitely helps processing. Um, I would say that some therapists can help, but I also, talking to some friends who've gone to therapists, if the therapist has a different perspective on, like, reality, than how you're approaching it, it might not be as helpful. So I think talking about catalysts with people who are spiritually oriented can be helpful. And then we just talked about giving space to catalysts in the human experience. So it's a non-exhaustive list, but there's many. This is all part of, I think, the chewing and the digesting and the distillation of the nutrients from the fiber.
That's a great and pretty exhaustive list of ways to think about it. It goes to show you that when we apply skills, we are selecting from a toolkit. Ideally, we don't just lean on one. We don't have a hammer for every situation, right? Sometimes you need a screwdriver. Sometimes you need a saw. And so it's good to go over that. I mean, it is very instructive to me, at least, to know that there's lots of different options available. I can be creative in response to Catalyst. It doesn't have to be this negative contracting thing. It can be, this is how I like to think of it. Like when I'm at my best, I expand into the Catalyst. I open my heart, I feel it deeply, and then that allows me to get past it and expand into the possibilities of the moment that the catalyst is only one part of, right? And this actually segues well into the next part that we're talking about. So let's jump back into Kuo. Here we go. Secondly, it is well to realize with a glad and light heart that indeed much of what flows into your system will flow out, unchanged by you as you are by it. Experience, like foodstuff, comes with husks and skins and waste parts that cannot do your energy body any good. It is a mistake often made by those upon the spiritual path to try to cling to every bit of experience, thinking that it all means something. The sheer volume of experience that flows through your energy body is astounding, and the attempt to hold on to it and shape it in some intellectually satisfying way can indeed constipate your energy body. The one known as Freud mentioned that sometimes a cigar was just a cigar. Sometimes a coincidence is indeed just a coincidence. When you are ready for synchronicities, you will begin to see them multiplying all around you. Each time you recognize a coincidence as having a spiritual lesson in its hands, you open yourself more to that level of living which this instrument would call, quote, magical. The more respect that you give to the details of your existence, the animals and birds that you see, the names of the streets, and of the people that you meet, and so forth, the more open that you will become to receiving many helpful hints and pointed suggestions from your environment. Let's take a break right there. I think that this is incredibly useful. What we're talking about, so there's the triggering aspect where it's purely emotional, and it is kind of your learned mental reaction that can often get in the way. And we're trying to learn different mental reactions that give us time and space for the catalyst. But there's also another important part to catalyst, which is that not all of it is catalyst. Not all of it is the lesson. Some of it is just the fiber. And that's a really interesting thing that I don't think I'd ever given direct and patient thought to it before. What do you think about this, Nithin?
So it is an interesting concept, and over the years I've been formulating something similar in that I often so you'll have these situations where aspects of the catalyst seem like it's clearly catalyst, and then aspects of the catalyst or aspects of a situation you're like, is that random or like what happened? And then I've sometimes taken the approach that I'm not sure if what actually happened wasn't random, and I'll wait for like a repeat of the of the experience, because I'll tell you this: if it is catalyst, there's gonna be a repeat, and you haven't learned the
Yeah,
lesson. There's gonna be a repeat, and what's interesting is, well, one, it'll be repeated, and it's like clearly okay. You'll get the message in so many different ways, especially if you ask for in meditation
yep,
clarity on whether there's actually a lesson here. Man, you get hit over the head like 500 times. At least that's been my experience. And then what's
me
also
too.
interesting is in the moments where you're wondering if it's catalyst and it doesn't end up turning out to be catalyst. For me, at least, it's really weird in that there's always been a, like maybe a few months later, almost when I've forgotten about it, a resolution that explains what happened, like a new fact that comes out that explains, oh, it was just a coincidence. And
Yeah,
it's always interesting. It's like there's closure for me when I really seek about a situation that seems like it could be catalyst. Either I'll get a repeat of it, or I'll get some sort of closure a few months later, even after I've almost started to forget about it. It's really weird.
yeah, and that must be it. I could see that being really useful because just like Kuo and the Confederation repeat the same information over and over again, but they do it in these slightly different ways. And I think that's very helpful because we don't always hear it right the first time. We don't always hear it in one context what they're actually saying, but in another context it might get through us, right? It might get through to us. And I think
Right.
Catalyst is the same way. It's like when it repeats, it means it's important, and therefore you don't have to worry about getting it wrong. Your reaction, the way that you process it, you will get it right eventually. There's no worry there. It's just about what path are you going to choose to finally balancing this. That's where the skill comes in. Just because trying to do it more efficiently and with less suffering is always nice. I think I don't know which Confederation source it was, but they said once in a session, you know, the creator does not want you to suffer. The creator is not looking to create problems for you. The creator is looking for learning. You don't have to experience this negatively if you don't want to. Most of us do, right? Most of us learn the hard way. That's fine. But that's our choice. And that's where the skill comes in, I think. This part where we're talking about um, the discernment of synchronicity and coincidence and subjective hints, I think is also useful for those who call themselves seekers, because that can also be a crutch that we lean on just as much as it can be a helpful hint that we use to wake up. Um, Coincidence is often like seeing a street sign that like reflects exactly what I was thinking at the time, or seeing 11:11 on the clock or something like that. Like, it took me a long time to get to the point where I felt like I was in balance with that stuff, because often I would get those little hints, I would get those little synchronicities, and I'd think, all right, now I have to do something. Now I have to like I have to start paying attention, and I get all amped up and worked up, and I'm telling myself this big story about what's going on. That's what we always do when we apprehend reality. We tell ourselves a story about what it is that's going on, because the bottom line is that there's a billion things going on in that moment. So we have to narrow it down to the thing that's relevant to us. And the skill comes from tweaking that relevancy, I think, allowing ourselves to think more expansively about it. But part of that expansive thinking, I think, is considering that maybe a synchronicity is just a coincidence, considering that you are the one who decides what's significant in your life, not hints from the creator. And you can't use synchronicities and hints that you can't put to use. And that's okay, because we're all learning. We're all growing towards a higher consciousness, and we'll get there. And if it's not useful, it's not useful. I don't like when people, it bugs me, because I've done it in the past. It bugs me when people force an overly magical approach to their life that seems to be so exotic and twee that it's hard to engage with. Right now, you're not living a life. You're just telling yourself stories that distance you from the real emotional depth of what's going on. I find that people who talk in coincidences, synchronicities all the time, like all the time, they tend to be running from what's right in front of their face, the real emotional things that the synchronicities are trying to point them towards. And instead, they're just creating this magical story. I don't think that's very helpful. It's like bypassing.
I would agree. I mean, I think discernment is actually probably a very important lesson. I think it's probably, if I had to guess, because it's always on. I think it's a more advanced lesson, frankly. I think it's related to the green, blue, and indigo rays. And I think it's, if you haven't really struggled with discernment, then you probably haven't really, really, I guess, engaged with that catalyst, which is an important catalyst.
Yeah.
I've gone through this so many times, and I think a lot of seekers go through this, right? And I think discernment is interrelated to some sort of distortion related to just following authority, basically.
Yeah.
They're very interrelated, and you know, it comes up in that, okay, some book, whether it's the raw material or whatever, you know, or some religious text or some guru has been right about X, Y, and Z. Therefore, they must be right about every other thing they talk about, and that's a basic lesson of discernment. I feel like it shows up in major religions, right? Just because the message of love is the right one, well, everything else they're talking about must be true. And it's a very important lesson, because, and it's a constantly evolving lesson, right? We're always learning more and more about discernment, but until you fully step into the lesson of recognizing that discernment is both a skill and a lesson, you're giving away your personal authority. You're giving away your free will, and you're giving it away to either others who are going to manipulate you with these synchronicities, or to random chance. And there are synchronicities, there are magical experiences, but there are also experiences that others manipulate, you know, and cause. And there are experiences that are random. And until you, as your own personal authority, get better at figuring that out, I think you're missing a key aspect of actually recognizing the magic when it's there, instead of always just assuming it's there.
Yeah. So I keep coming back to this concept of skill, because it seems like what you're talking about, the idea that, hey, if they said some things that I accept in the past, then they must be saying things that I need to accept in the future. And that is a kind of heuristic. That is a strategy that you have adopted.
Right.
It may be appropriate and it may not be appropriate. And what I really find interesting is not which one is right or wrong or whatever that might mean, but understanding, like you said, all of the different heuristics, all of the different skills that you have, and giving yourself time and the mindful ability to apply what you think is the best, and then learning from that, right? It's a package deal. If you're going to apprehend reality and deal with its messiness and the hidden lessons in it, then you're making a bargain with yourself one way or another, in my opinion, that you're going to have to chew on that. And you're going to have to balance that later. It may be much, much, much later, or it might be tonight, or it might be in an hour. But these things that are important enough to trigger us, that are important enough to throw us off our center, need to be respected. And they need to be treated with care and a creative approach that gives yourself options, that puts you in charge. That is what I think third density is about, just as much as building the social memory complex. It's each of us being responsible units of that complex. We can't just discipline each other into a social memory complex. It has to come from each of us personally, individually. And so learning these ways of dealing with hardship and stress and lessons, this is all good stuff. And it doesn't need to be any more exotic than we want it to be. Nothing that we are saying really has that much to do with new age woo woo. It has a lot to do with just emotional, psychological health. And then just seeing, once again, right? Like I bring up like a sort of more medical idea of this stuff because that is also a heuristic, a lens that we can apply to a situation. It's not the whole truth of the situation, but it's useful in some situations. And so just understanding this creative way that we can sort of dance through the illusion instead of just always going around with one tool that we use, one skill, one hammer, one ability. And like a trigger is a skill too. A trigger is something that we learn to defend ourselves from a pain that we couldn't face. That is also a skill. So we're unlearning skills and we're learning new skills. And this is all, and there's plenty of time to do all of this.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like the time moves so quickly between major catalyst to major catalyst, but there's time. I mean, there's time in the day to really take out 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's funny because I think there's a part in the raw contact where they talk about, hey, if you don't use your catalyst, you're just going to eventually leave your life and need to come back to learn these lessons again. And it's almost like time speeds up in our lives as we get older because of the tremendous amount of catalysts that we don't process.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, we need to move you quicker so that you can get more of it, right? Because you're here to have the catalyst, right? Anyway, let's move on. So we were talking about, okay, here's the last sentence of the last paragraph from Kuo. The more respect that you give to the details of your existence, the animals and birds that you see, the names of the streets and of the people that you meet and so forth, the more open that you become to receiving many helpful hints and pointed suggestions from your environment. However, this line of thinking is only good up to the point where you begin to hinder yourself from simply letting things flow. By your need to identify and catalog and think about all the synchronicities. It is very helpful to find that balance between living a life unaware of the amazing profusion of interconnections and inklings and clues that these interconnections will give you, and living a life so wrapped up in self-analysis that you are never able to break out of that bubble of thinking about yourself, so that you can simply be yourself. Let the husks be husks. Let the skins be skins. Let them pass through you and away from you. If you do receive difficult catalysts, then let it flow. Move directly into the heart of it. Chew it well. Take it in small bites insofar as you can. And just keep chewing. Keep swallowing. Keep affirming to yourself that much of what is moving through you will move from you. And only that which can do you good is going to stay with you. Yeah, that just kind of like wraps up what we were, kind of recapitulates what we were talking about earlier. Like this stuff is going to work itself out. And the skill is often in better, more efficient ways to process catalyst so that it doesn't have to come at us so hard. There is I don't know if it's Kuo or Ra or who, but they said that there's a principle that like, if you ignore catalyst, it just mounts, right? It just gets more and more intense. It just keeps trying to get your attention. And so it's actually a skill, I think, to learn how to take it in bite-sized pieces, to take as much as you can, only take as much as you can, but process it so that you can take more. As you learn how to keep processing this stuff, that I think is an important part of discernment, is you learn how to discern by processing these things. We always talk about discernment, as if it's just something a seeker is supposed to know how to do. No, right. I think one of the ways that you learn discernment is learning how to digest this catalyst and learning what sticks, what lessons, what aspects touch you in your heart, and which seem to just be, that's just the proximate cause. It may be that I have a real problem with, say, bad drivers, but as I sit with that catalyst and process it and get to the core of what it is that actually triggers me, I realize it has nothing to do with driving. It has everything to
Right.
do with a feeling of not being respected on the road, not being respected by other people or whatever, right?
Absolutely. And I think this taking small bites is very, very important. There's many layers. Any we talked about any given catalyst can have effect or distortions in multiple energy rays, energy centers. But for me, what I found very fascinating, and I found this to be very true in my journey, and Jeremy, you can tell me if this is true for you. So often, once you start the spiritual path and you're familiar with, the energy centers and the basic concept behind them, you can identify the catalyst as affecting certain energy centers and be, oh, this one's about self-love and loving life, and that's generally true. Those are the ultimate lessons. But I've found you're that sometimes doing that spiritually bypasses. You have to do the homework. Why is it? What are the intermediate steps that makes this situation make you feel like you don't love yourself?
Yeah.
What are the intermediate steps that makes this situation feel like you don't love life? And so, I mean, just taking an example you just used. So, maybe the thing about driving is that maybe an intermediate step is at some point you were criticized for your driving, right? And even though maybe you don't, and this often happens where I don't even remember that, but the catalyst will keep showing up until I visit that intermediate step, and I put down in my notes. It's like you might know the answer to the question, but the teacher wants you to do your homework and show your steps. And I found that processing catalysts is the same way. You might know that ultimately you figure out, especially in social situation, okay, this is yellow ray stuff. You might figure out that the ultimate goal is to feel this way or to be this way. But until you visit the individual, often stuff from childhood, upbringing, memories that led you to have beliefs that are contradictory to the undistorted yellow ray concepts, you skipping to those realizations isn't gonna be as effective or isn't what is required of you as to actually revisiting every intermediate memory and step and realizing that's where the distortion started building and first arrived at.
Yeah, it's like we
Does that
get
make sense?
yeah, it's like we get tested. We
Yeah,
have
yeah,
to we have to write a short answer that shows that we understand this stuff on the
exactly.
test. We can't just do A, B, C, or D, right? Like that's easy to skip. It's easy
Yeah,
to fudge. No, I totally agree. It's just worth pointing out that we are both the test taker and the test giver, right? Like
yes,
I think the reason why third density works in this way with the veil, and we're kind of working um, like orthogonal to the actual issue. It almost seems like a lot of the spiritual lessons we're learning at 90 degrees. Like we're not directly working with them. We're always working with them through a layer, through
yeah,
a sense of indirection. Is because we're learning something that really we're learning a spiritual power, a way of using our own capability that this this very crude world exercises. We're going to use the powers that we're building with these lessons in fourth density. And I think a lot of those powers have to do with our ability to focus our will and our ability to stand on our own truth, because we won't have as concrete of a reality as we do now. And so it's going to matter a lot more. This is just me speculating, listener, but it's going to matter a lot more. All of these mental and spiritual and emotional disciplines that we're learning, they're going to come into full flower in future densities. It's here that we're working on the muscles. And so it's important to understand that, like, sometimes the lessons we're learning don't have any greater meaning, and they have a lot of like baggage along with them that isn't crucial to learning a lesson. They're only there to facilitate the lesson. We don't have to worry about some of the more mundane details. They're just the fiber. They just allow us to get that food into our mouth. And once it's in our mouth, then it's up to our digestive system, i.e., our spiritual practice of sitting with it and distilling it, to then work with it, extract what's important, and leave the rest behind. I mean, I think even who we are as third density personalities, we're going to be leaving a lot of the things that we think we are behind. This personality that's talking to you right now, I mean, that's not really who I am. I'm so much deeper, I'm so much broader, but I just don't have access to it. So that's going to be left behind probably. But the love that I was able to express, the love that I was able to accept, that is what teaches. And that's what I'm going to be taking with me.
I couldn't have said it better.
Good. Good. Then you don't have to. All right, let's move on. So Kuo continues on the third item. Thirdly, it has often been said that food is at its best when it is eaten with friends, when there is laughter and good conversation and good fellowship. And this is true. In the company of friends, the body relaxes, the heart can remain undefended, and the digestion flows smoothly. Likewise, within your energy body, see the food that you are eating as being eaten at a party. Do you think that you are in a rut? Do you think that your life is boring? Look again. Let your life be a celebration. If it seems that the only one at the party is you, then light a candle, put out a napkin, and belly up to having a wonderful party by yourself. Find reasons to laugh. Look for those thoughts that put everything in perspective. Make it a habit to step back and ask yourself what the wider view might be. There is a skill that can be learned, in the way that any habit is learned, of being good company to yourself. Watch for those thoughts in which you put yourself down, call yourself stupid, bemoan your fate, or otherwise open the door into that view of life in which life is hard. We do not suggest that life is not sometimes hard. This is so. It is one of the very reasons that you wanted to be in this environment, this boot camp, as this instrument calls it. Yet at the same time, within you is the ability to choose to replace a downward spiral with an upward spiral. Both this instrument and the one known as G are fond of the prayer of St. Francis, and we would iterate it at this time. Listen to the choices and come to see how you may create, of any situation, a positive and hopeful tendency. The prayer, in its translation into your English language, goes like this. O Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, teach me to seek not so much to be loved as to love, not so much to be understood as to understand, not so much to be consoled as to console. For it is in pardoning that I am pardoned. It is in giving that I receive, and it is in dying that I shall rise to eternal life with my beloved at last. Okay, sorry, that was a big chunk for me to take all at once. Just didn't seem like there was a good stopping point. But the point about food best enjoyed with friends is one that I've been grappling with a lot. The idea that the sorrows and struggles in our life, we actually really, really benefit from sharing them with others and letting them reflect our experience to us. What do you think of that, Nithin?
Oh, absolutely, man. I mean, it's so useful to discuss it with like-minded friends. Now, I think it can still be of some merit to discuss it with people who maybe aren't on the same understanding. But really, if you're talking to someone who doesn't understand these concepts, the benefit is minimal. I think it's similar to maybe just writing out in your personal journal or diary. But if you're talking to someone who really understands, some basics that you at least of the spiritual path that you're on and the way you're looking at catalysts, it is so helpful. I mean, we've both helped each other out so many times
Right.
in our one-on-ones and stuff, and it's just amazing. There's it's not even, I think, the logical exchange of words. There's something energetic about the experience that occurs, and it really seems to help the digestion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's one of the reasons I wanted to start this working group and to make the core of it rest upon individual interactions where we share our lives with each other and we try to work through our catalyst together. Of course, I agree with you. I would probably go farther than you and say that you can also process this catalyst with others who don't share this philosophy. The difference is that you have to do more translation. And that can be not as relaxing as just being able to speak your native tongue to somebody, right?
And,
Sorry.
and also in those cases, because I guess it depends on who you're talking to. If it's a best friend, they're probably, even if they aren't on the same path spiritually, they'll probably give you a lot of leeway. But if you're just talking to like an average friend who's not on the spiritual path, maybe I just have bad average friends. they might try to shoot down and really shoot down your interpretation. So in a way, it's just a very different experience. It might be actually just as useful. I've always been like, all right, he's gonna shoot me down. Like, let me actually avoid this. But maybe in its own way, if you're able to defend your interpretation, or maybe not defend, but if you're able to engage that level of skepticism, maybe that is its own catalytic transformation in its own way.
Yeah, and it could also be considered a skill to know which of your friends can help you at a moment.
Right.
And also, it's certainly a skill as well, this interpretation that we are always doing of trying to take the love that we feel and translating it into the moment that we find ourselves in. Like, that's also a skill. And like your idea of being able to take the pushback and get something from it, as opposed to just feeling misunderstood, also a skill. There's lots of skills being referenced here. These are, and like, I think you put it best when you suggested to the listener that they experiment and recognize how many different skills are available. They're not stuck in one approach to reality. They can try different things. It's like Pima Chodron says that, like, when you're stuck, like, the last thing you want to do is keep doing the same thing over and over. Do anything else, even something foolish, just to try, just to break yourself out of this rut, because that's where freedom comes about. It's also where responsibility and danger come about. That's true. You can also mess yourself up and put yourself back a few steps, but that's the gamble of life. That's always what we're trying to do when we go into the unknown. We don't know what we're going to face, and it's perfectly reasonable that we might have some apprehension towards it. The faith that you were referring to earlier, I think, comes from doing it anyway.
Right. Absolutely. As I said, I think faith is hard to define, but maybe that's only because I'm still working on those indigo ray lessons. But
Me too.
It's almost like I would define faith nowadays, and this is different. And honestly, my definition of faith has been changing over the past few years. But it's almost like just your relationship with the creator. Like, what's your relationship with the creator?
Yep.
Is it distant? Is it close? Is it like, do you feel supported by the creator? It's like, it's the confidence in just that even if everything goes wrong, there's still going to be some things going right that you have no idea what they are, right? It's just, I don't know. It's hard to explain.
The way that I would explain faith, and I know that this is incomplete, but I'm going to do it anyway, is it is the recognition that the will that you are expressing is aligned with the creator's will.
So I totally agree with that statement in general, but I don't know if I thought of that.
You don't think it speaks to faith particularly, though?
So you're saying if your will align, well, no, it is an aspect of faith, right? Because basically it's the confidence. I'm just putting into my terms. It's the confidence that whatever is happening, what you're doing, is in alignment, even if you don't see that alignment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's
like
recognizing your own creatorship, and
right.
that the basic thing that makes it creatorship is that ability to realize your will, to realize your desires. And I think faith comes in when we recognize more and more that our true desire is the creator's desire, which is for all to become one again. And so acting on that faith becomes, what actions can I take? What thoughts can I think? What ways can I be that express in this unique moment that unity? It's a symbol of the unity, but it's a symbol that teaches, and it's a symbol that affirms to ourselves what we want and why we want it.
Yes. And while you're saying that, I was thinking about probably a distortion of my own in how I really try to word my definition of faith in a way to inform people that what I think faith is not. So I don't think, I feel like faith is often misused. People be like, oh, I have faith that God won't take my house from me even though we're going through foreclosure. And see, I feel that's too specific. I don't think faith... I mean, you can have emotions and beliefs surrounding that, but I wouldn't characterize that as faith. Faith is more, in my opinion, as applied to that situation of, even if God or the creator takes my house from me, I will still somehow be provided for. Like, it's not about a specific situation. It's more like a general confidence in the relationship you have with the
That's what
creator.
makes it so hard to put your finger on, because people, it's kind of like when you pray, I'm going to pray for a promotion at work. It's like, well, you're putting a lot of criteria on the creator's ability to fulfill your needs.
Right.
Like, but as you understand what it is you're really after in life, oh, I'm going to pray to the creator to advance my career in the best way possible. And
Right.
then you expand even beyond that and you say, I'm going to pray to the creator to just give me the lessons that I need. And then you can
Right.
expand beyond that and just be grateful for everything that you're dealing with. Like, there's these different levels, and they're all expressing your desire. They're all expressing something that you want, but you are understanding yourself at these deeper layers. And as you do that, you become more able to deal with whatever it is that life is giving you, because you have a place to put it where it is proper and it fits and it's not a mistake and something that shouldn't be happening, right?
Right. It's almost like broadening or understanding that, at least at this stage for most of us, um, if for us to be in alignment with the creator, there's a recognition that it's just hard to break free of the separate self and the ego. Now we can diminish it. We can be more and more in that in the consciousness of the creator, but there's still an aspect of us that's always going to feel, at least in my opinion, in 3D, or at least the 3D 4D transition, that feels separate.
Yeah.
And so when our desires are coming from that separate self, we might really want a house, but because we can't fully see the creator's will for the situation, we broaden our request. And so instead of praying for, I mean, pray for to keep your house for sure, but this philosophy or this way of thinking about it is to be in complete alignment. You pray for your basic survival needs to always be taken care of, right? You're broadening it as to make your will more in alignment with whatever the creator's will is. And,
Right. And the creator's will is not about material specific things. It's about
right.
broader spiritual concepts. That's the key. And that's exactly why those of the Confederation work with questions that deal with spiritual principles so much more effectively than, like, who will win the Kentucky Derby, or, transient stuff like that. That stuff is only valid in a very small moment in the billions and billions and billions of years of this creation. But love will always be relevant. Love will always be something that we need to learn more about.
Jeremy, it's always so wonderful talking to you because you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe, at least in the raw material I've read, it describes faith in this fashion. It just, what I'm talking about, and I think what you're talking about, is just what we've learned, what we've distilled about the concept of faith through our personal experiences and applying the general principles of the Confederation philosophy to our own lives. And it's so beautiful when organically two separate seekers, they come up with the same understanding, because we're basically pulling in our journey from these universal concepts, right? And it's just a great feeling to be like, okay, I'm not totally crazy here, I'm not totally insane. There's someone else who's thinking along the same lines.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. And I would ask maybe we should do an episode on faith just straight up, since this
Yeah.
seems to be something that has a lot. Like, I just did a search on lawof1.info, and there's a lot of different mentions by those of faith. And I feel like my concept of faith came from that, but it also was conditioned in the way that I can make sense of it in my own mental constructs. And I'm talking to a lawyer who wants to get the words exactly right. So, like, we both have our hangups on discussing this, and maybe if we addressed it head on in a future episode, we can make more sense of it.
I think it'd be a great idea.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and move on. I don't think we have too much more to go. So here's Kuo. Kuo says, "How easy it is to grease the wheels of hatred within you. And if that habit takes hold within you, then you shape the energy body in a way that is very toxic for it. You can take catalyst that has a perfect right to be taken badly. And yet, if you refuse to take it as it is on the surface, as you would have the impulse to do, and instead look for the love in that hateful moment, look for the light in that darkness, look for the hope in that despairing thought, you can cleanse your system of its toxins. It is not particularly helpful to scold yourself or to punish yourself. It is only helpful to sympathize with yourself and offer yourself those hopes, those consolations, those little bits of light that can make the darkest night, the longest suffering, into something that is doable, bearable, and survivable. If you do not hang on to those emotions that are dark, they shall indeed wash through you. Although, certainly in the midst of a blow, emotionally speaking, it does not seem to be possible that you may heal or go on, we assure you that you can. You are true of heart, firm of purpose, desiring to be a servant of the one infinite Creator, and a force for love in your incarnation. These things about you are true, regardless of what happens. Hold on to them and use them. Use the knowledge of yourself as a good person, a trustworthy person, a loyal and loving person, so that you are able to bring your own torn spirit into unity, your own dark thoughts into light of your own love, and your own belief that all is well. Wow, I think this really, we've several times in this conversation anticipated something that Quo then goes on and says.
Yeah. Well, let me jump in because I think for where these two paragraphs are going, I actually think a very important point is actually in the first line of the next paragraph. There will be times when it seems that your energy body is ill. Let it be ill. And the reason I think this is really important is this really ties back into if you do not hang onto these emotions that are dark, they shall indeed wash through you. And I think what's super important and super key to understand is it's not suppressing or refusing to acknowledge when you have these dark thoughts or hateful emotions. If you actually suppress them, that's a way of hanging on to the hate. It might not be in your conscious mind, but the way you let these dark, hateful thoughts, the anger, flow through you, and how you don't hold on to it is you let them arise within your consciousness. You don't necessarily identify in that moment with, and usually if you've done this process, usually it doesn't, the anger and the hateful emotion, it doesn't last forever. It's usually, I would say, more momentary. Now obviously it depends on the type of catalyst, how long that moment is, but as long as you use a meditative technique where you don't identify with any of the hateful thoughts or anger that's occurring, but you let it flow through. You let the hate, it's almost like I feel like I'm talking about like
I know.
Star
You're a
Wars
Sith Lord.
stuff.
Yeah.
No, but you let the hate flow through you so that you can release it and
Yes.
you experience it, but you don't identify with it. And so that's when Quo says there'll be times when it seems that your energy body is ill. Let it be ill. That's it. I think it's so important that you acknowledge these destructive or less useful emotions so that you don't hold on to them and so that you can process this stuff.
Once again, we're on a different skill. The skill of being able to find the love within the moment. One of the hardest things I've ever tried to do, and I think I do it very poorly. But it's easy to see why, because I often take catalyst that has a perfect right to be taken badly, right? And the skill comes from giving yourself a chance to really feel that hurt and then to be able to find the healing that's always there. And if you can do that, then the hurt, the negative emotion, the darkness has served its purpose.
And I just want to clarify here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So, Jeremy, when you say negative in this case, you're not talking about service to self. You're just talking about
unpleasant
emotions that we don't like. Unpleasant. Right?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. Thank you. And I also think that there was this idea of it's about widening your perspective. Although certainly in the midst of a blow, emotionally speaking, it does not seem to be possible that you may heal and go on. We assure you that you can. Like, that is one of the biggest ways of dealing with hurt and pain. And it's something that I see when others are going through tough situations too. We think that when we're at our lowest, that's the way that we'll be for the rest of our lives. And that's the way we're going to die. It's feeling exactly like we feel right now. And that's when we despair because it seems like there's nowhere to go. And the bottom line is that just because it feels that way and it feels true and inescapable, we also need to learn the skill of recognizing that it isn't the truth just because it feels that way. There will be another day. There will be another year. There will be another time where we will have had time to let this pass through us. We hold on to it, I think, because we feel like there's something wrong because we're in pain. There's something wrong with us because we're hurting. There's nothing necessarily wrong with us because we hurt. This illusion hurts. It doesn't mean there's something right that you're happy either. Like, emotions just happen to us. They're like weather. And it doesn't mean there's no meaning in them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it's not a problem that you're feeling them.
Right.
But
It's actually
often we feel there's a problem if we feel bad. And I think that's where a lot of uh, triggers and defense mechanisms come from is, okay, I have this bad feeling, so now I need to do something to get rid of it. I need to do something to respond to it. And sometimes you can just feel bad.
and honestly, like I've been exposed to this concept for what 10 years now, because that's when I started reading the raw material and Confederation philosophy. But I haven't really like I still never really liked unpleasant emotions. Um, but honestly, in the last 2 years, although I still don't like major catalysts, it feels very uncomfortable, all that stuff. I've noticed that even while I'm feeling, and I let myself feel the unpleasant emotions, there's a kernel of excitement now. That's a
Mm.
part of those experiences where I know that this is a transformative process, and I just can't fucking wait to see the outcome. It's a small kernel, and I wish it was bigger, especially since recently I've been having some catalysts, but it was never present there before. And it's just amazing that even in the darkest moments, often in the past year, 2 years, there's excitement about how transformative this catalyst is going to be. It's just, I never even thought that it was going to be like that. And it's just really weird,
Yeah, I've
but
gotten
beautiful.
glimpses of that kind of feeling too, where it's like, oh boy, here comes another one. I wonder I'm going to learn from this. Like
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to having had processed it rather than looking for a way not to have to process it at all. I shouldn't have to deal with this negative emotion. I shouldn't have to deal with this grief and suffering. Instead, it's not all the time, but sometimes I'm like, oh, I wonder how I'm going to get through this, like in an anticipatory way, right? Because
Yeah,
it's going to show me
exactly.
something new because I don't know how I'm going to get through it. And
Yeah.
it's really weird. And it doesn't happen all the time, but it's very cool. And it comes from like having sat with enough problems often enough that I start to realize, hey, I felt I felt low in all of those situations and I got through it. Like you just learn that life is fundamentally not a bad or a good thing. It's just where you're at right now.
Yeah.
And the only way forward is through it.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep on moving. So you said the first sentence. There will be times when it will seem that your energy body is ill. Let it be ill. Enter into the exhaustion, the depression, or whatever condition which is afflicting your energy body at a particular moment. It is not necessary to behave or to feel in a certain way. So often, spiritual students attempt to maintain a positive point of view on the level of behavior. They simply scoop the inconvenient emotions out of the way so that they will be able to perceive themselves as wise, metaphysically correct seekers. While we encourage you to tweak the thoughts as they come through you and to help yourself to find better versions of your own truth, we do encourage you above all to witness to your own truth, whatever that may be. If you are in a bad way, it is not the end of the spiritual world. And it is far better to allow yourself to heal, to move through that huge amount of catalyst that has somehow gotten stuck in your system, than to try to hurry it, even if you are feeling perfectly miserable. It is far better to allow the natural flow of your own energy body to move that through your system as it really feels to do, without your asking your energy body to put a rush on it and to get rid of the feelings that you did not want. All of your feelings have gifts in their hands, even the most crushing and cruel. There is for the dowdy seeker a lesson in everything. Consequently, if you are inconvenienced by what seems to be an attack of the megrims, whatever that means, allow yourself the rhythm and the grace of a natural flow of returning wellness of being, knowing that you are fundamentally very sound in your health. All right, I bit off a bunch there, but there's some really good stuff in there. The first thing is recognizing the rightness and the proper nature of sometimes having low times. It is not the end of the spiritual world that you feel this way. It is not something that you necessarily need to put a priority on moving through your system. Sometimes you need to sit with it. Time is a very interesting thing to me. It's one of the things that I find most interesting about how this philosophy relates to our lives because it seems like that capacity for patience, of being able to train your attention on things and to hold it there, is a lot of the lesson that time has. being able to sit with people, sit with ourselves, and let that harsh experience, that bad feeling, do its work on us instead of just trying to repress it or expel it, which is what our normal reactions to negative feelings are. We just want to get rid of them. We just want to get rid of them somehow. And to just be able to sit with it is such a teaching moment. I promise you, listener, the next time that something troubles you, if you just take and sit with it and think about it for 5 minutes, really think about it and really feel it. That's the key. Really feel it. Actually, thinking about it. Like, feel it.
Yeah, feel is super important.
Don't come up with a narrative for why it's wrong for you to feel that way. Don't come up with some explanation for what it really is, and therefore you shouldn't feel the way that you feel. No. You're going to have all sorts of justifications and strategies that your mind has come up with so that you don't have to feel pain. That's what second density creatures do, is they avoid pain and they go towards pleasure. We are learning as spiritual beings to abide these things and to not see them as problems, but to be able to be ourselves and to radiate love in whatever situation we find ourselves. And so you're doing good work when you feel these things.
Yeah, it's almost like a mindful awareness of your feeling. Like, let the thoughts arise, just don't identify with them, you know? Whenever you're having uncomfortable emotions, at least this is what happens with me, is even when you're feeling them, you'll have thoughts about how to resolve the external situation causing the problem. You'll have thoughts on new rules to make for your life, so this won't happen in the future. Just the ego trying to protect itself. And in fact, however well-intentioned the ego might be in trying to protect you, it actually prevents you. If you identify with it and be like, yeah, that's the solution, I'm going to take action and I'm going to make a new rule. And to be fair, identifying with the ego and with those thoughts will actually make the emotion temporarily go away, but it won't address the underlying distortion, and you'll have the same catalyst in a different situation. So it can get confusing, because before we come on the spiritual path, making those resolutions about life, those new rules, that new and promises to yourself to take action to resolve the situation, it does make you feel a little bit better. And let me be very clear here. It's not that you won't take action. It's not that you maybe won't have some, hopefully not a rule. A rule is too hard and fast, but maybe you won't have some new, shorthand way of handling the situation in the future. But the thing is, you first let yourself feel what you need to feel. Don't identify with everything. And then once you've processed the emotions, you can revisit what action you need to take. But you're revisiting it from a place of love and acceptance, as opposed to before, when you're still feeling all those hurtful emotions and you want to avoid it. You're approaching your action from a perspective of fear and insecurity and a sense of control, right? Which is, as you know, if you've read the raw material, it's definitely not positive, and depending on your level of control, it's either in the morass of indifference or negatively polarizing if you're really trying to be controlling about every little aspect of it.
I totally agree with you, and I think it's really important for us to repeat this, that because the ways that you were talking about, the ways that I was talking about too, about thinking about things in a way that prevents you from having to feel them fully. That is a skill that we have learned. What we are trying to learn now is that skill doesn't serve us as well as we thought it did. It helps us be normal third density personalities. It doesn't help us be fourth density radiators of love. And so now that we've made this choice that we want to polarize, we're going to have to learn some new techniques, some new skills. And it's very much, in my mind, about the balance between wisdom and love. Because what we're talking about is it's not just about feeling things and never do anything about it. It's not about just doing thing about it and never feeling it, right? It's both of them. It's wisdom and love. It's skills and feeling. You need them both. And if you're hearing in this session that it's all about just accepting and adopting new skills, you're not hearing the whole thing. And if you think it's all about just feeling bad and that's somehow how things are going to work, you're also not hearing it. It's both of them at the same time at once. I also want to point out the thing that they said about, well, let me just read it. So often, spiritual students attempt to maintain a positive point of view on the level of behavior. They simply scoop the inconvenient emotions out of the way so that they will be able to perceive themselves as wise, metaphysically correct seekers. Okay, now Kuo is addressing us, not just normal people, but the people who actually have taken the baton and decided to run the race. We need to recognize that our behavior, Ra has said, behavior is like the least important part of our catalyst processing. Like the thoughts and the
Right.
feelings are the things that really matter. The feelings, most of all, the thoughts, secondarily. And only after all of that has been dealt with, the behavior, because the behavior comes from all that stuff. The behavior is the last ditch reflection of yourself, of your distortions. And remember, if you deal with your thoughts and your feelings, you often won't need catalyst that's very harsh. We think that there's something that I don't know who says it. It's all blurring together to me after all these years of studying this stuff. But one of the sources said that if you would just continue to work on yourself when times are good, you wouldn't need to have to work on yourself when times are bad, because you wouldn't have the bad times. The bad times happen because you have lessons that you're learning and you're not doing them without the friction, without the catalyst of the negative stuff. So it's all about, especially if we consider ourselves spiritual students, letting ourselves be human, and then also giving ourselves the time to patiently work through things that we may think don't reflect well on us. Friends, we all have things about ourselves that we don't particularly care for. And we have to accept those things most of all. It is not about kayfabing and acting like you're a guru in public so that people can see how spiritual you are. It's about being a real human being, being authentic, and letting love radiate. And sometimes that love will come through. Maybe it will be harsh. Maybe it will seem like it's angry or something like that. That's also the creator. The issue is, what do you feel? Getting in touch with that feeling that's generating all of that, because that's what we're here to work on. And all of this behavior, all of this thought, these are just ways to get a handle on something that otherwise is so intractable and so abstract, and it passes through our hands when we try to grasp it. So we're in this illusion so that we can have more concrete experiences that then make them workable. And then we take the essence and we move on. But acting spiritual, there's all these new age influencers on Instagram and stuff like that. That's a really, really vivid example of what I'm talking about. But yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've met who call themselves spiritual, and they talk about concepts like love and things of that nature. But whenever we're talking about something, and often I'm not even expressing it as a fear, but there's just something objectively to be concerned about, whatever. And no, don't think about it, because that's if you think about it, that's how it's gonna happen. I'm like, and their approach to positivity is just instead of
Yeah.
organically doing the work upon yourself so that you naturally feel more positive and more loving and more giving, it's no, just don't think about all the hate and the anger that's within you, and and by definition don't process it if you're not thinking about it or at any point, and just put it deep into your subconscious. And it's, I can't tell you how many different people I've talked to who just say that in a group conversation when there's something about something, a concern or insecurity. It's no, just don't even think
Yeah.
about that. Don't just shove it out of your mind. I've heard that phrase so many times, and I'm like, I don't argue with them, because often these are not close friends. But I'm just like, it's a meme out there almost. It's it's apparently a very common principle of new age or spiritual thinking that the way you be spiritual is, and the way you express positivity is, you just don't even acknowledge any fears or negativity at any level whatsoever, and don't even think about them. It's
Yeah,
very
I
interesting.
agree. Well, we're here to say something different, and that's cool. All right, so we're down to pretty much the last page. So let's just jump back in. Fortunately, your energy body has a great deal of intrinsic health. And that is the last thing that we would suggest to you at this time. Sometimes when you eat the wrong foods, you might take medicine to help yourself rebalance. Just so, when you have a case of spiritual indigestion, it is very helpful to call upon your guidance and to ask for the help that is all around you. Your guidance is as near to you as your own heartbeat. The angels that are around you wish only to be asked for help. As this instrument was reminded recently, it is always well to remember to ask for that help and to open yourself expectantly to receive it. Do not feel, no matter how alone you seem to be, that you are truly isolated. My beloved friends, nothing could be further from the truth. You swim in a sea of unity and interconnectedness that would astound you if could you but see it. And you have many, many friends on the inner planes, friends that are drawn to you because of the beauty of your personalities and your great desire to serve. And these angelic beings wish only to lend you their love and their light and to back you up on the inner planes so that you never feel alone. This is their one hope, that they may enter into your life and help you to realize that which you wish to realize. The handiest and simplest way to work with your guidance is to enter into the silence each day. We often speak of entering into the silence and maintaining a silence of self as being a very important part of a spiritual battery of resources that are helpful to the seeker. And in speaking of that which enables one to use the food of catalyst well, we would be remiss if we did not mention both the passive and active kinds of meditation. All right, let's pause there. Anything you want to remark on, Nithin?
I'm just gonna make a confession that so I've talked about the importance of daily meditation, but honestly, in the past like month, it's been cut down to just like maybe every other day, or even just 3 times a week, and it was honestly a way to avoid processing a catalyst I was experiencing. So
I
it's
have found that too. I have found that I
avo-
avoid meditation at the very times that I need it. It's really crazy.
yeah, exactly. So it's very interesting. It's so that would be that's one thing I wanted to bring up. Another thing I want to bring up is that at least in my experience, you always do have help available. But there's two other important concepts related to requesting aid that I think at least is true for me that I want to mention. One, the level of aid and the ease at which you can access that aid seems to directly turn on how big a life lesson it is for you. If it's a huge, like pre-selected, pre-incarnation life lesson, the aid that you get is more like cheerleading. They'll cheer you on, but they want you to figure it out on your own because it's one of your major life lessons. If it's a lesser lesson, that isn't like doesn't involve past lifetimes or a huge amount of karma, you can just often directly ask for the direct answer and the solution. It was what I found, and you'll get it. That's at least true in my experience. I guess just because, and it brings me to a second point that when I ask for aid, and this is kind of related to prayer, I found that it's most effective if you word your request for aid in the most broad way possible. And once again, it goes to that concept of aligning your will with the creator's will. So instead of asking for, let's say you're having some sort of a weird pain, that you've been to the doctor, there's no reason for it, they say it's psychosomatic. You could ask, so praying for direct aid would be saying, Creator, I ask for you to heal me so that I no longer experience this pain, right? But maybe a way to ask indirectly so that you can be empowered and perhaps to be in more alignment with the Creator's will is to be like, Creator, I ask for the wisdom and understanding um, so that I can heal this pain on my own, right? It's I think there's almost it's related to free will, but there seems to be some sort of impetus that we empower ourselves through our learning process, as opposed to asking some external entity or creator to do it, because we are the creator, right? So I think that's an important distinction
Yeah,
that I
no,
wanted
I
to
agree
mention.
with you. There's a skill to opening up to help and not being picky,
Yeah,
but instead recognizing that we will get what we need. Yeah, I
yeah,
agree with that. Let's see. And I just think it's important to recognize that we often feel alone. I think it's good to remember that we can lean on others in our life, and we can always lean on others in the inner planes. That there's a lot of help. We aren't, and not just that, and not just that we're not alone, but that we're not the first person to have gone through whatever we're going through. Like other people have dealt
right,
with it before. We think that our pains and our fears and our biases and all this isolate us and make us different from everybody else, but they're actually the thing that make us most human And therefore, they're the thing that connects us to everybody else's path and all the other things that everybody else is dealing with. I have found that the more that I reach out, the more that my pain unites me with other people when I allow it to. When I allow it to be a means of connecting. These things that happen in our life, how we act, how we react to them, the attitude that we take, I think that's a lot of what Kuo has been saying here. Like that affects whether it gives you indigestion or it's properly digested. And so ultimately, the skills that we're looking for are the skills that allow us to approach the material of life with an attitude that reflects our best understanding of ourselves and the Creator. It is in meditation that we will get in touch with that part of ourself that we think is highest and best. And so if you don't have anything else to say on this passage, I think we'll take it to the end here.
Yeah, just that it, if sharing from an open heart, kind of your own distortions and experiences, it does, and your own trials and tribulations in life, they do bring you closer together. And one thing I've only realized recently, because I think it's interesting that the better you get at understanding your own catalyst and recognizing it and your own distortions, it helps you get better at noticing that in others, right? Obviously, there's going to be a layer of obfuscation and inaccuracy. But what I've noticed is that people who I used to think were very, very different from me, or different from, like, comparing two different people on the outside, very different from each other, they can actually be very, very similar. People respond and process catalysts, especially people who aren't on a spiritual path, or at least aren't on a consciously spiritual path. They respond to catalysts very, very differently. You can have two people with nearly the exact same orange ray distortion of lack of self-love, and they will have, on the outside, completely different personalities. One person will be depressed, sullen, soft-spoken, shoulders slumped, and the other one will be like, chest puffed out, really loud, boisterous, and but very easily, doesn't like to be disrespected. And then you really realize at the core they both have the same energetic distortions. And so it's very fascinating the deeper you go in how common people are in what they have and the trials that they have, but how yet different it presents itself on the
that's why I think they put a point on saying that don't focus on behavior, right? Behavior can be a way of dealing with lots of different things, but when we get down to the causes of the behavior, they tend to be the same kinds of causes as other behavior, and they unite us. And I think that one way to work with that is to cultivate a sense of vulnerability, cultivate being vulnerable with other people, that openness, that willingness to fully admit to your humanity is what allows other people the safety and the space to do that themselves. A lot of people, I don't think very often, let themselves just be human. They hold themselves to some weird standard that society or TV or whatever impelled them to. And if they ever admit that they don't really get it right much, it feels like an admission of failure. So sharing our failures with each other, sharing those low points helps us make good use of them, and it brings us together. Because there is nothing worse than suffering alone. There's just nothing at all worse in my mind. All right, home stretch. And this is where Nithin can take some scolding from Kuo. I mean, I do too. I struggle with meditation too. Kuo says, in the passive meditation, it is enough simply to enter into the silence and allow the self to drift away, whether you simply follow your breathing or have another means of achieving the silence within. Indeed, whether you sit or walk or even run to meditate, it is all one. The essence of it is to enter the silence, for within the silence is that great original thought of love, which can become your consciousness if you can get your small self out of the way. Then there is the active kind of meditation, where you are musing and contemplating your day. And in those times, it is helpful to work with those things that triggered you today, experiencing them in memory, allowing their opposites to come into your consciousness, and allowing that opposite dynamic to take over your consciousness. Then as you finish, hold those two opposites side by side in your mind and affirm the 360-degree nature of your nature and of the Creator. The Creator is all things, and you contain all things as well. As you become more and more known to yourself, all of these ways of achieving good digestion and a happy energy body become ever more smooth and easy, even effortless to accomplish. So many things, my friends, are a matter of habit. Create the habits of contemplation and meditation, of lightheartedness, thoughtfulness, and balance, and you shall have a very good meal of life.
100% agree. I mean, um, I have a daily practice of contemplation, but I think it's very important to also have a daily practice of actual passive meditation, and that's what for me is fallen by the wayside a little bit. But as in the past week, though, it's gotten back to normal. Um, but it's so important. It's just so important. The way I kind of characterize meditation in how it helps in passive meditation and how it helps me is it's almost like a it's as if you've slept on it for a few days. It's that access to the one infinite creator in that meditation. It provides stuff that you can't put into words. And it's very, very useful to re energize and recharge that way.
Absolutely. The thing that I want to say is I think it's very apt to say that you need two types of meditation. I've noticed this too. There are definitely meditations that I feel that I've benefited from where my mind is not still. Right. And there's also meditations where my mind is completely still and I feel like I benefited from it. And lately, having done this for so long, what I find myself doing is that my meditations start out active. And it's kind of like I just let my mind work through all this stuff. Once I let it work through, I find that it's then much easier to get to that still space because I've given myself a chance to kind of like scream. I've given myself a chance to like work out all the active energy, let it do what it's going to do. And like what I find is that like as this process of chewing on things, specific situations in my head continues, I see my standpoint getting more and more distance from that thought process. And I'm starting to observe myself doing this stuff rather than doing it. I mean, it's the same thing, but it's a difference in perspective. And then it's almost like the processing and the thinking and the working through it fades into the distance. And I'm just left with the ability to be silent and appreciate that without having to fight it. Because fighting a busy mind sucks, and it's not a good way to approach it, in my opinion. You're better to just let your mind be busy when it wants to be busy. Let it be still when it wants to be still.
I agree. I mean, I think most of my passive meditations start out with a bit of just observing the mind, and I'm sure you can have a whole session on meditative techniques, but in general, I think it's important not to judge your meditation,
Right.
right? So just
even bad meditations do the work.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to have, and like that's something where faith really does come in because it doesn't feel like it. When you have a bad meditation, it feels like you failed. You didn't fail any more than like because you struggled on the weights at the gym that day. You probably did more work there than you do in the easy days of the gym, The other thing I wanted to talk about is they talk about habits. And I think that we need to recognize that the skills that we're talking about get they get augmented and they become easier to implement with practice. And that what we're doing is we're laying down new grooves that will make it easier to do the things we want to do and harder to do the things we don't want to do. That's part of like, I think having a physical body that has these pathways. Our brain works with like neural pathways. And as we think more, the thoughts, those pathways get reinforced. As we do more things, it reinforces the ease of doing those things. So when we're working against the grain and trying to do different stuff, we need to have patience because we have to understand that we're building habits so that this doesn't have to be so hard to execute on these skills in future times. We're sort of investing in ourselves, right?
Agreed.
And pretty much with that agreement, we have ended the message from Kuo. There's some question and answer, but they don't really deal with this topic. So I think we're going to leave it there. This is probably the longest inaudible podcast episode ever recorded because Ryan never has this much time. But I think we can just leave it there, unless there was any other closing thoughts that you had, Nithin.
No, I really enjoyed our conversation. Jeremy, you and I have talked about this before, but you know, and Ra talks about this, right? To teach is to learn, and learn to learn is to teach. But I learned so much just by having these podcasts. Just in the process of making these, I feel like I've become wiser. So I want to just express gratitude and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this experience, man.
Absolutely. I learn a lot too. And it's good to have different people on to bounce ideas off of and to see what they fixate on. Like your listing of all of the different skills. That's something I would never have thought to do. And this is really good. It does exactly what I want, which is to show people the breadth of resources and approaches that are available to them so that people can feel creative and new and they can put their shoulder into their spiritual evolution and not just feel like it's something happening on them. It's happening to them. It's weird. We're in third density. We're in this place where we're starting to take hold of our spiritual evolution. We're not just evolution suddenly becomes not something that's acting upon us, but we participate in it. And so
Yeah.
this is very new for everyone. And so we can all be each other's friends and confidants as this moves forward. And that's what I consider you.
Thanks, man. I
Yeah.
same
All
for me.
right. Well, thanks, listeners, for continuing to be our friends and confidants. If you have any questions, concerns, ideas, you know how to reach us. Inaudible.show is the website, and the contact form is right on there. In the meantime, stay in the love and light.